The series between TSM and Team Liquid has just completed, and so now we have our winners, Team Liquid, facing off against Cloud9 in the finals of the mid-season showdown. And I think coming into this, things are looking okay for Team Liquid. I'm not going to say great, I'm not going to lie, but there should still be some concerns from them heading to play against E9. Their inability to properly set up for objectives, which luckily TSM were just as bad, if not worse, but they won't have such an easy time against Cloud9. And so the main takeaway for me from that series was just Armeo's ability to perform well. In fact, very well. He didn't skip a beat with slotting into Team Liquid. So this is a really big surprise. I thought TSM was actually going to win that pretty handedly. I had said, of course, that TSM were going to win 3-1. And I just thought because of the jungle substitution, obviously. But it looks like he's doing really good. And the only thing I will say is that Santorin did do a better job playing towards Jensen's lane. But so far, Team Liquid are really on a roll. And so with that, I would also like to kind of reiterate a momentum or whatnot, or maybe centrifugal force might be a better term. And I'm going to put a car analogy to you guys, which is, if you don't know how a centrifugal supercharger works, which is very similar to a turbocharger, right? In the sense that a turbocharger works off of exhaust gases, and it recycles exhaust gases in order to spin a fan, which then feeds, that fan pulls air in with, a pressure force greater than atmospheric pressure to pull in more air into the engine. That's how a turbocharger works, just fundamentally. It's very genius. Now, a centrifugal supercharger works in the same way. It still has a fan that spins, that pulls in more air. It's just using the energy off of the engine itself. But not only that, there are different types of superchargers. A centrifugal supercharger works in that the more RPMs that you get within your engine, the more boost that you're going to get, or I guess the more air that you're boosting. Boost and air are the same fucking thing. It's just boost is more it's after atmospheric, right? So it's forcing air into your engine, which is why turbochargers or superchargers help a lot. But a centrifugal supercharger ramps up higher and higher and higher the more that it goes, right, from the RPMs of the engine. It's just like what this scenario is essentially, is that Team Liquid are ramping up more and more and more, and they're getting that centrifugal force to then help them out into the final. So I actually think that's a real thing, and I think it's heavily underrated when you just think about playoff scenarios and maybe teams making a gauntlet run, right, or just a run in general. That's why they're so famous in that essence, is that they get all the practice and whatnot beforehand and kind of get warmed up and whatnot, get the confidence boost. And I think for this match, it was a really good confidence boost for Team Liquid, and to kind of do a little pre-test for Armeo before going up against the big dog in Blabber. So I think this is actually perfect fucking scenario, aside from losing your fucking main starter jungler, but you get what you can take, right? So let's get into lane by lane matchups. And of course, we're going to start with the top lane, which is Alphari versus Fudge. Now, I think most people would consider this Alphari favored. I'm obviously going to give it to him as well, too, especially after his series against Huni. I mean, he kind of made Huni look pretty bad, especially in game one. I know in particular, Alphari was just stomping the shit out of Huni. And then in the last game as well, too, Alphari was just popping off on Sion of all champions, right? Now, that should be noted, though, that Fudge has been looking quite good. And what I strongly suspect is he's gotten better at wave management. Now, I don't know that for sure because, there is no pro view. And even if I could look at the pro view, I probably wouldn't know what the fuck I'm looking at because I'm not all about the micro. But I assume his micro in that aspect has changed quite a lot. And I think it's blatantly obvious, even without pro view and shit, that he's gotten better with synergizing with Blabber, calling Blabber up to when, if there is a minion wave crash that is going to happen within top lane that, comes to him, that he's going to call Blabber up to get some protection because they know there's going to be a dive or whatnot. So I think just all in all, Fudge has improved entirely. So he's not as bad as I think maybe the general populace thinks that he is. So he certainly stepped up his game. But now Alphari is looking in prime form, especially after the series against Huni. So I think this matchup is going to be kind of rough for Fudge, but I'm excited to see if he can actually handle it. And so that makes me wonder if Cloud9 are actually going to put him on Scion duty. Because if you guys remember back when Cloud9 and Team Liquid faced off in the winners bracket, that C9 had him play Scion, I think it was 4 times. So you can kind of see that there's maybe this reliance on Fudge to play weak side and, not get all the resources or whatnot, unless absolutely necessary that Blabber needs to go up there in order to save his wave or whatnot. So, and on top of this, I think what's also important is it's very clear that Alphari is not afraid of Renekton at all. So I want you guys to actually go back into the pick and ban phase for game 4. You can clearly see that when the player cam rolls over to Alphari, he's just kind of chilling there. And he's like, well, because both, Hecarim and Renekton are up for first pick and Team Liquid are on blue side, right? So they get the choice between Hecarim and Renekton, that I think it was partly his call to pick Hecarim instead, because he's just like, fuck it, yeah, I'll go against Renekton. Like, I have no problem with that. I'll just pick Scion, and we'll stomp the team fight. And not sure if, all of that is true. That's just conjecture. But I thought it was interesting when the player cam rolled around onto Alphari. So now let's move on to the jungle matchup. Blabber versus Armeo, right? So I think this one is probably going to be mega jungle difference. And look, I wouldn't be surprised if in fact, I would be surprised if Armeo didn't get smashed. So the expectation here is if he doesn't get smashed and he just gets beaten a little bit, then I think you can kind of call that a success going against, one of the most dominant junglers ever in the history of the LCS. I think that's fair to say now. But when you look at their series against TSM, Nocturne did not look good from Armeo, and guess what? Blabber plays it. And you bet your ass that Perks has probably been playing it mid. So they've been practicing this, flex pick and whatnot, to where now it becomes this double-pronged pick to where it's going to be a pain in the ass for Team Liquid to decide in the draft phase. So, and this is an entire nightmare for them, essentially. And I think what's interesting about Blabber is that Blabber might pay quite a bit of attention top to help ease the transition. But also remember that first game in the TSM versus Team Liquid match where all 5 of TSM put pressure on Alphari, but Alphari then chunks out Huni like super hard, and then they can't pull off the dive like they wanted to. So I could see something similar like this happening to where Alphari is just kind of crushing Fudge, and then he pulls back, and now all of Cloud9 need to address the issue, or else it's just going to get an exacerbated problem. And then Alphari himself just being able to play a little bit more defensive now, and he seems to have reined back his tendency in order to press for too much, which is exactly what we were seeing beforehand, which is why people were punishing him quite a lot, and Cloud9 in particular were doing that, and Blabber was doing that. So I think he's gonna be like acknowledge that in essence, and we could see some tough decisions from Blabber. And if I were Blabber, I would actually try and focus mid if he's got the choice to do that, because Jensen, I've noticed that Jensen looks significantly worse when pressured, right? So when the enemy jungler is trying to pressure this lane, and also when Jensen doesn't get resources in that lane from his jungler. And as we know it now, he has a substitute jungler, and it seems like Armeo doesn't really put that much emphasis onto mid lane itself. So we'll see how this works, which, by the way, just irregardless of all of that and Blabber and Armeo and whatnot, is that jungle doesn't work like, he's necessarily got the choice every single time to put his presence into mid lane, right? It's not like Blabber that's actually how you play the game as a jungler. In fact, you decide on the game state of which lane is winning, which lane is losing, and you need to tend to, and there and henceforth. So you can't just go into the game and say, I'm going to play to this lane only, and then ignore all the nuances and all the signs that point to that you should actually be playing towards a different lane, and kind of scrap all your pregame shit, because that's not going to work, because that's not how the game is panning out. So with that said, I would like to see Blabber play towards the mid lane in order to influence that matchup. Now, speaking of mid lane, let's go on to Perkz versus Jensen. I think this is very much Perkz favored, even with the series against TSM for Team Liquid. And I wouldn't be fooled by the last game of Team Liquid versus TSM, because realistically, I don't think that's going to happen for Team Liquid again. So I would just kind of write that one off of the books. And on top of that, it's not going to happen for, against Perkz, a legendary player like that. Now, I think what will happen, in fact, is that I can guarantee that Cloud9 will use his champion pool to throw Team Liquid off, which is absolutely why Team Liquid had bad drafts against them in their last matchup. And many people may wonder why Team Liquid had such bad drafts against Cloud9. It's because Cloud9 is a really fucking hard team to draft against. In fact, they are the hardest team to draft against because of Perkz specifically, but also because of Blabber as well too, and that he's shown enough now to where he can play multiple different styles, and his jungle pool is a little bit wider than what the actual meta suggests. And then you have the whole debacle of Sylas into Hecarim is something that is just going to be an absolute fucking nightmare for Team Liquid. But we'll get into the whole draft theory later on. Overall, I think Perkz does very well in side lane situations in order to maximize his CS, and also set up waves for Cloud9 in order to punish other teams and kind of pressure them around objectives, and to say, well, either you go for this wave over here that we already had pushed, or you can test us at the Drake or at the Herald. You decide, but you're going to lose one of them. So it's up to you, whichever you choose. And if you want to try and contest us at this objective, you're going to lose those minions over there. So that's what Cloud9 do very well, and that's what Perkz does very well, which is why I also think that's just kind of a back pocket thing that Perkz has an advantage over someone like Jensen. So let's go to the bot lane. Sven and Vulcan versus Tactical and Core JJ. We're just going to, once again, judge these guys as a duo instead of just individually because, as we all know, they're all fucking tied to the hip, right? So I actually think this is a bit closer than people might initially think. And so hear me out. Early lane of Tactical and Core JJ, they actually take a lot of risks. And I don't think that people notice that entirely. I think whenever, Team Liquid's bot lane is performing poorly, they say, oh, well, Tactical is just, he's kind of really bad and really off right now, and he's not really having the greatest split, as opposed to beforehand, and he's just kind of fallen off. But realistically, actually, I think that Team Liquid's bot lane is just taking more risks. Some of them might be bad risks, right? Like they're taking a 40% play, when in reality, it's just like, well, you don't really want your ADC taking a 40% play. And so I think just Team Liquid's bot lane does a lot of early lane risks, and that is to their advantage at sometimes. And of course, tactical is just objectively worse, come to the late game in comparison to Sven. So I think as the game progresses further and further, it's going to be more and more difficult for Team Liquid because they have this unreliable ADC come into the late game. And then I will give the edge, though, to CoreJJ. By far has been more impactful on roams than Vulcan, and I actually think this is one of the biggest strengths of Team Liquid is that CoreJJ is able to roam, and oftentimes he roams into the mid lane in order to get Jensen ahead, which is why I think if Blabber puts his presence around mid lane, he'll actually be able to set up perks for domination to where it's going to be kind of an impossibility for CoreJJ to ever influence that lane anyways. And Blabber can just do the counter gank in order to help out his mid laner avoid some of the antics that CoreJJ will do. But with all that said, I do feel like Vulcan is better at setting up for objectives. It just always seems like every other team in the entire league is very bad at setting up for vision beforehand, before going for an objective. I'm talking like a minute before. You should have your vision down and you should have your waves kind of set up how you want them overall, and then you go for the objective. And I feel like Cloud9 is a little bit better at doing that than basically every other team, and especially Team Liquid just does not look good around objectives. And if anything, that last series was a fucking indictment of how bad North America actually is. And I think a lot of people, a lot of analysts, a lot of pros, when everyone was watching that, it was just kind of a lot of shame for North America, right? So let's move on into the draft. Now, I think the draft is going to be very particular for this game, and there's a lot of nuance in this. So for Cloud9, they have Sylas into Hecarim. I think that's going to be just a big problem. As I said before, it's going to be a nightmare. This is super big. This allows for Cloud9 to not really ever think that Hecarim is a necessary ban. It's kind of like a luxury ban if they so choose to do. And they can possibly get Renekton instead on red side, right? Because, as I said before, previously, Alphari was just like, I'm not scared of facing against Renekton. So pick Hecarim instead, right? When they were on blue side. So you can kind of almost guarantee that, well, if you're on red side, then you could just leave Renekton open as Cloud9. You could force the Hecarim pick if they want to do that. And then you just end up picking Sylas, and you already have that counter going. So I think Team Liquid are in a very tough situation when it comes to the Sylas pick. Lucian being countered by Annie. I'm curious to see how this actually works out at the highest level. With Perks being on the other side of that, I just wonder how that interaction really plays out. We saw it within the TSM versus Team Liquid series, and it didn't really have a super big influence in the very beginning. But then again, Lucian didn't really get an overwhelming substantial lead. It was more so the fact that things were being influenced by the jungle, which then allowed for TSM to win the mid lane as such. So I think just that interaction is going to be really interesting to see if Cloud9 are willing to opt into a matchup like that. So very curious to see that. Yone is always a thing, for Perks. So that's just a champion that Cloud9 just have in their pocket, right? It's something extra that they have. So that's just another card that they can play. So I want to move to the top lane because I think that Fudge doesn't pick champion. So I think Fudge doesn't pick top champions in the first phase, then Scion will get banned. So if he isn't able to pick up Renekton or Gnar or whatnot, then Scion's most definitely going to be banned. If his pick phase rolls into the second spot, right, to where now the second part of the ban phase goes on, and so that Team Liquid can then target ban him and ban Scion and, you know, maybe ban Camille or something. But it's very uncommon for top champions, top lane champions, to not get picked in the first phase for blue side because, you know, Gnar or Renekton are usually left open. Speaking of which, Fudge has also, I believe, only played one game of Gnar this entire split. So I'm wondering if Cloud9 have worked on that itself, because Gnar, it's not so much about Gnar's lane phase. I don't think that's the problem with pro teams playing it. It's just the whole team cohesion type thing and working with the Mega Gnar and also TP plays and kind of announcing how far your rage bar is to where when you TP in, people are expecting you as Mega Gnar or close to it, or, you know, there needs to be a lot of communication about how far your rage bar is. And I'm not sure if Cloud9 have actually nailed that portion down. So maybe they just don't want to pick Gnar. And that might be a huge weakness, because this leaves a weakness for Cloud9's blue side draft to where they probably have to ban it when normally Gnar is banned on red side. Senna is huge for Team Liquid, and with Tactical's poor play, Cloud9 should definitely ban this because it looks like a crutch for Team Liquid. So I wouldn't be surprised if Senna was banned, maybe even in the first phase, right? It seems like since Cloud9 have such an advantage in the draft when it comes to just unique picks, right? You have fucking Sylas, you have Nocturne, you have Yone. So they have a lot of different cards up their sleeves to where, well, now they can kind of play with that to where now they could start banning unique shit against specifically Team Liquid. And I think if you do ban the Senna, that's going to put them back quite a lot. And not only that, but it just looks like they have the advantage with Tristana too, when you think about it, right? Because we haven't seen Tristana played from Jensen, I believe. And so Perks can play that, obviously. And then Sven can also play that in the bot lane. And it looks like Team Liquid don't have any confidence for Tactical to play Tristana, even though he played it in the first game against TSM. I know that, but it just looks like they've been avoiding this whole Tristana drama for quite a while. You know, ever since fucking the memes came out of Tactical doing like the Malphite ult into the enemy team, you know, quote unquote Malphite ult by, you know, the Tristana W into the enemy team for no fucking reason and dying in the jungle. So I think that's a big hole for them as well too. So overall, I think C9 have a monster advantage in draft. They win jungle mid, but lose top and somewhat bot too. It depends on how aggro Team Liquid want to play. But I think that they should play aggro because Tactical is so much more unreliable in the late game phase. So you can expect, or at least Team Liquid should play more aggressive in the early game. And hopefully we see that out of them. That's the only way that I see Team Liquid actually winning this matchup anyways. But if Cloud9 can just play for late game, Team Liquid look much worse. So I actually think for this series, I'm going to go Cloud9 3-0.